Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about college and university admissions with Bill Fitzsimmons. Bill is Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Harvard College. He is one of the veterans of the college admissions world and widely recognized as a driving force for the diversification of Harvard's entering classes. Bill graduated from Harvard in 1967 and has been dean since 1986. Welcome.
Great to be here, as always. We've known each other a long time, so it's great fun to get together and talk in front of other people as well.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Well, maybe if we could talk a little bit about your job, because I think people always ask about your job. Who do you report to? We know that you recruit students, but how does it work internally at Harvard? Who do you report to, and how does that work?
I report to the Dean of the Faculty, who is Mike Smith, who is a great computer scientist. And I also have a good, close relationship with Drew Faust, who's president of Harvard University. And we all work together to try to do the best we can for the college.
And speaking of the best we can for the college, what does that mean exactly? Are you trying to diversify Harvard College? Are you trying to get the best students who are mathematicians? Are you trying to get the best students who are social scientists?
I think it's all of the above, Steve. We, in broad terms, think of the world in a fairly complex way. There's a professor at Harvard who's been there a long time. His name is Howard Gardner, and he talks about his theory of multiple intelligences. So the way to think about it is that we're interested in people who have talents across the board, not simply verbal and math intelligence, but interpersonal intelligence, musical intelligence. He has a kinesthetic intelligence, but all the talents that would make a difference in the world. And we're trying to get people together who would be the best educators of one another over the 4 years during college, be inspiring to their classmates. We hope be inspiring to their professors. And then the synergy that results, we hope, will make the students we admit go out into the world and do great things for the rest of their lives. So that's a pretty broad agenda. So yes, we're interested in great mathematicians. We're always happy to see that our math team does very well in the national math contests every year. But it's way beyond that. We're trying to turn out people who will be great in the public sector, the private sector, and emerging sectors in technology, for example. So it's a wonderful job to have because we go all around the country and all around the world every year to try to find talented students who we think would make the world a better place. I'll be here in DC tonight, and we'll be seeing something on the order of 2,000 parents and students. I'll be with the University of Virginia and Princeton. And having those family members today, I know lots of times, you talk about in your book and also in your work generally that it does take a family. And when you think about higher education in lots of respects, you have to think of it as a family venture. And so that's one of the reasons we'll be going on to other spots in Virginia later in the week and over to West Virginia, in fact, later. But the whole idea is to find talent in all its forms, wherever it might be.
And what if some families think that the students are perhaps more talented than the kids are, or vice versa?
Well, this is a real problem in some ways on both ends. In my era, it was much more the case that wonderful students who should have applied to places such as Harvard or University of Virginia or Princeton or any of the great colleges, universities in America, and there are many, didn't apply. In fact, many didn't go to college. Today, that's different. In some cases, there are probably people who may be shooting a little bit too high occasionally, but that's probably a better thing than was the case in my era. So more and more people are going to college today, and what this means in the end is that America is able to take much greater advantage of all the talents of all its citizens, not just a slice of its citizens. And I would argue that the future of America, really the future of America's leadership role in the world, depends on whether or not we're able to take advantage of the talents of all of our students in every part of the United States, inner cities, rural areas. If we're not able to do this in the decades ahead, then America's leadership role will be less than what we would like it to be. So the stakes are very high. One could argue that the battle for America depends in many ways on whether or not we're able to get these great families and these great kids to make certain that their wonderful sons and daughters get a chance to make the most of their talents.
But you and I have talked about this before off air. You know as well as I do that a number of families are scared of places like Harvard. And they're scared of what's going to happen to them. They're scared of, the parents are scared about the influences that may affect them. How do you deal with that on the road?
Well, we deal with it pretty much the way I guess that I thought about it when I was applying to college, because my parents hadn't gone to college. We lived about 15 miles from Harvard, and I had never seen it until my senior year in high school. And the first two teachers I asked to write recommendations for Harvard wouldn't do it, because they said Harvard, and this is a long time ago, 1962, 63, the Cold War was on. Harvard was a bunch of communists, they said, a bunch of atheists, a bunch of rich snobs, and that if you went there you would flunk out and you'd lose your soul. This was a Catholic high school that I attended. So that was quite a package of stereotypes. The whole idea was that perhaps that people like me wouldn't fit in there, but I was lucky enough to find other teachers who provided recommendations. And then when I went over to visit Harvard and a number of other colleges, these colleges were very, very different. They were very welcoming. And that's a message that we and all the colleges are trying to get out today, that whoever you are, if you're ambitious and talented and you work hard, you could think about any college in America, any college in the world.
But let's look at the flip side of that, which obviously that's a positive message. But what about the students who come from metropolitan New York or metropolitan Philadelphia, who now perceive that it's harder to get into Harvard and other Ivy League schools simply because more spaces are going to the students who are from the hinterlands, as it were?
Well, of course, there are lots of situations today. Almost all colleges today have different applicant pools from the past. Only a very small number of colleges, in fact, tiny percentage, actually have highly competitive admission. But it is harder to get into Harvard and to the other Ivies and the UVAs and the Stanfords of the world. I think what we say to people is that there are no quotas of any kind. In fact, you mentioned New York and you mentioned Philadelphia. That's the region of the country now where we're getting the most of our students, the largest percentage of our students. Now, California as a state is the biggest provider of students these days, but New York isn't far behind. And what we do is we recruit broadly around the country, every place you can imagine. We visit 120 cities every year with Georgetown, Penn, Duke, and Stanford. We visit 20 cities with UVA and Princeton, these big evening meetings, and we do counselor breakfasts in the morning. So we're trying to say to people that, if you're talented, you should consider these places. But the thing to remember is once the recruiting is over, the best students, the ones who will take really the best advantage of Harvard over the 4 years, those are the ones who will get in. So it's one of the reasons why students from, say, the District of Columbia area, from Philadelphia, from New York City, have done extraordinarily well in terms of getting in. And now, in a funny way, that's kind of our breadbasket. So there isn't, the mythology was, I'd heard, that somehow it would be easier to get in if you applied from a highly rural area. It actually isn't. I mean, there is certainly a slight geographic look at City of Boston and City of Cambridge students because we are located in both places. We think we should do our share of providing the future leadership for Boston and Cambridge and Massachusetts. But beyond that, it really is an open competition, which is one of the reasons why, say, Philadelphia and New York students have done so well in getting in, because they are applying these days, which is the first step in attending.
Sure. But as you know, I mean, you send out something well over 50,000 search letters every year.
We send out quite a few because not everyone who gets a letter applies. So we still have that problem. And not all the people who go to these evening meetings that we go to with other colleges apply. But yes, we have a very, very good pool, and it is considerably harder to get in than when I applied. When there were only 5,000 people applying for my class. So it's very, very different today. But I think the message is still very much the same. You should shoot for the stars. You should talk to counselors. You should talk to your parents. You should get as much advice. The media does a wonderful job these days with the guidebooks, for example, and there's lots of good information out there in magazines, lots of good information really on the internet. So I think realism is important. I mean, we do hope that people, when they're invited to apply, take those extra steps to make certain that across the board they'd be strong candidates. But beyond that, they should go ahead and do it. We provide, and all these colleges provide, fee waivers for students who come from needy economic backgrounds. So that shouldn't get in the way either, for people thinking about these places. But you're right, it's more than whether or not you attended a recruiting meeting or received a recruiting letter. You need to do some homework.
Fair enough. And you mentioned the fee waivers. Maybe if you could say a word or two about the program that Harvard does for students who are under a certain amount of income in terms of how much tuition that family pays.
Well, we have a revolutionary new financial aid program. And for example, we now no longer require students to take out loans, as was the case when I was on nearly full scholarship. In all the old days, we asked students to work 8 to 10 to 12 hours a week and to bring money back from the summer, so you do have to help yourself. But if your family income is below $65,000 a year, your parents are required to pay nothing. And if your income is from $65,000 to $120,000, it slides up from 0 to about 10% of income. And then from $120,000 to $150,000, it's about 10% of your annual income. All of this depends on having a normal asset situation, not having an oil well in the backyard or something of that sort. But even over 150, there is financial aid available. In this economy today, there are families with considerably higher incomes than 150, with multiple children in the family and disastrous, situations that they're facing. So this is a very generous financial aid program. It is certainly among the most generous in the world, and one of the things we hope with making it so clear too is that people can, for example, right now, as of the end of this month, October 29th, all colleges and universities have to have what's called a net price calculator on their websites. Ours is already up and running. It's a very simple and straightforward, put in your income, put in your assets, not multi-pages. In fact, it's only one page. And you're going to see, if you go on colleges' websites, especially after the 29th of this month, you'll be able to see pretty clearly what you can expect in financial aid. So this is a great time. Transparency has never been greater with the net price calculators, but also with we have, we call a bright line program. It's very simple and very straightforward.
Well, 2 comments on that and 1 question. I don't know if you know, but we actually did a show on net price calculators. We brought somebody in who actually was one of the designers of one of the big companies that deals with that. And then Sidney McPhee, the president of Middle Tennessee State, came on the show to talk about how they're going to use the net price calculator.
Great.
The question I was going to ask you was about the issue of the transparency. Why not? Harvard has so much money, billions of dollars in the endowment. Why doesn't Harvard just say no tuition?
It would be a wonderful thing if the world worked like that, but unfortunately, even Harvard, with the scope of the things that we try to do, we have a very generous financial aid program. We have state-of-the-art research facilities, the largest university library in the world. They're, try to attract the best faculty members in the world and have the best laboratories, have the best humanities centers. This is very, very expensive. In the financial aid world, we will spend next year about $166 million on undergraduate financial aid. About 60%, a little over 60% actually, of our incoming class this year is on need-based aid from Harvard. About 70% are on some kind of financial aid. Our endowment only covers considerably under 50% of that $166 million. So we're constantly out trying to raise money for financial aid, and it's a real concern. So we can't do everything we'd like to do. When you think about it, you think about, for example, research journals. For your libraries, we have over 16 million volumes in the library. Many of the research journals, many of the books we have to buy, the price every year is way in excess of inflation in order to keep at the cutting edge. We have enormous commitment that we've made in the life sciences. For example, we have a stem cell research initiative that I think is on the brink of coming up with some truly valuable findings. It'll make a huge difference in not just for health in the United States, but for around the world. Trying to run those kinds of things is very, very costly. But we're a nonprofit, and we will continue to raise the money we need. We're hoping that we will do well in continuing to raise financial aid money so that we have a higher percentage, at least, of our financial aid commitments covered by the endowment.
But if you don't mind me pressing you a teeny bit on this, I mean, why not just simply use more of the endowment funds? I mean, Harvard has billions of dollars in the endowment fund, and I realize I'm putting you on the spot by asking you that, but I hope you don't mind.
No.
Because it seems to me that Harvard has just so many billions of dollars. Why not just use a small fraction of that to basically use more of it for financial aid, and then students wouldn't have to take as many loans?
Well, again, first of all, they don't have to take loans.
But we're talking about the students who are above a certain threshold who may have to take loans.
They do have a choice of that. I guess if you think about our commitments across the board, our endowment is designed to get us through the good times, but also through the bad times. We lost a quarter of our endowment just over the past few years because of the financial downturn. This is a perfect example of one of the reasons why, when you have an endowment, you have to make sure that you set it up in such a way so that in the worst of times you can continue to exist. So you could continue, for example, in my world of financial aid, you can continue to admit people without regard to their financial need. I think we've been very prudent, in the way we've conducted our financial affairs. The truth is that we, like lots of other places, will be having a capital campaign, probably beginning in 2 or 3 years. And I think it's that constant generosity that our friends and our alumni and alumni provide that I hope will get us through this current economic downturn, which unfortunately at the moment is a little bit unclear what's going to happen. But looking forward, we just want to make sure that we're able over the long run to do what we need to do across the board, to advance new knowledge, to bring in the best students without regard to their financial need. And that's why you need, in an unpredictable world, to be prudent about how you invest your endowment. I think a lot of people are under the misconception in financial aid that we're fully endowed in financial aid. And I have to go every year and ask Mike Smith, the dean of the faculty, for a lot of, be close probably to $85 million this year of so-called unrestricted money that could go to any purpose in order for us to continue to have the generous financial aid program we have.
And that brings me to the question of the issue of the democratization of the world and the elite aspects of the world. And it seems to me that Harvard is kind of at that cross-section. And to be fair, to a certain extent, I'm at that cross-section as well with my day job. But the thing that I find really interesting is how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that Harvard is a special university, and it's a special place, and it has a special place among American and among universities around the world? But on the other hand, we have this goal as a society that we want to give access to the best things in society to more people. How do we juggle that?
Well, it is a juggling act, and I was over this summer at the University of Manchester in England, and they had a conference with about 70 or so university officials and government people from the UK, and they had some Americans over there and some of the people from the continent, and we were talking about this very issue. And the real issue that the UK is grappling with is the same issue in lots of ways that we're grappling with, and that is how can you, when you think about democratization, I believe that American higher education has democratized dramatically, certainly since the time I arrived at Harvard in 1963. What's happened is that it has reached out ever more aggressively around the country and also around the world to reach out to talented students from all different kinds of backgrounds. The idea here is that we want to produce people who are cutting-edge mathematicians, cutting-edge scientists, cutting-edge historians, cutting-edge humanists. We want people who will go out to every kind of profession you can imagine and make a difference in the world. So I would argue that by democratizing ourselves, what we've done is we've opened up the talent pool for ourselves. And I say this for Harvard, I say this for American universities, which in many ways right now are seen as a gold standard across the world. But other universities, other countries are also working hard to achieve the same goals. The whole point, in other words, is, in the past, in the distant past, what tended to happen is that higher education really was only for the elite. But it was an elite really more or less from a socioeconomic perspective. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get students from every kind of background who have remarkable talents. And I would argue that to the degree to which we, other universities in America and other universities around the world are successful here, will determine, I think, how much progress we're able to make in the next few generations. So it's terribly important that you think broadly and you think democratically about reaching out, as opposed to just say, well, we're just going to do the usual thing and see who shows up. That is not going to be what you would ever want from a public policy point of view for America or for any other country for that matter.
Which raises the issue of recruiting students from overseas. Harvard has, as you well know, since you started most of this, recruited much more broadly overseas than before. How does that help to democratize the world of Harvard?
Well, I have a good friend who graduated from Harvard in 1923. He passed away a few years ago. He was 107. He ran his first marathon, 26 miles in London, when he was 82 years old. So he was quite an amazing guy. He always argued that the best single thing about his experience at Harvard was the education he received from his fellow classmates. And we believe that is still very important. What you learn from roommates, people in the freshman seminars and the small tutorial groups that we have, in the extracurricular activities, in the dining halls. It's a 24-hour-a-day living experience. We are very much a residential college, and we have a 98% graduation rate, which is typically among the highest in the country. And it's a place where people are very happy, but people are constantly learning from one another. And I think it is a much better place today when you think about the education you can get, say, from a classmate from Montana, or some of those classmates from California, or some of those classmates from the UK, or from Jordan, or from Ethiopia, or from the Far East. So this is really what we're hoping is and it's not just that you get that education over the 4 years. It's that you have created friendships, a network, as it will, a social network, if you will, that will last for the rest of our students' lives. And so when we, the world clearly, there's no way that in America can possibly succeed, without engaging fully with the rest of the world. And we're hoping that our students, will, because of the experience they've had learning from faculty members with international backgrounds and classmates from international backgrounds, that they will be much more effective and contribute in a much fuller and much more effective way across the world later than would have been the case had they not had that opportunity.
But we have to assume, of course, that most students will not have that opportunity because there are so many applicants to Harvard. Most students simply don't get in. What do you advise students who don't get in?
Well, I am thrilled, I have to say, not only by what I see. I look at Harvard, for example, and Harvard has made so many changes in the past 5 or 10 years. I mean, it's like a new institution, totally different from the institution that I attended in the 60s. But, the advising, we've doubled the number of advisors. We have peer advisors now as well. We have a freshman seminar program that was only 30 freshman seminars, small classes a few years ago, to 130 now. A new general education program, new study abroad, all these things. Now, those are not unique to Harvard. And one of the great things is I go around visiting other, parts of the country and parts of the world with Georgetown, Penn, Duke, and Stanford, and with University of Virginia and Princeton. These are amazing institutions. And I think students, today, whether it's a case that you go to one of the so-called selective college admission places, or whether you go to places that have more open admission, the opportunities today, I mean, as much as Harvard has improved, it seems to me that all of these places have improved. They're much more student-friendly. These are institutions, including Harvard, that are happier institutions, in fact, in many ways than say, the one I attended in the 60s. So I think, you almost can't miss today. I read through some of those wonderful guidebooks out there about how good, say, the small colleges are today. University colleges such as Harvard, we offered students the opportunity to take courses at the graduate schools at the same time they go to college and use the 80 or so research centers while they're there. They could work in the stem cell research initiative with Doug Melton and David Skadden, and in fact, you can now major in the equivalent of stem cell research, but you could also go back to your residence hall at night at Elliott House, and there would Doug Melton be as master of the house. You talk about a 24-hour-a-day learning experience. But I go around to these other colleges and I see very similar kinds of things. And I say to young people today, wherever you decide to go, I have a feeling you're going to like it. Whether it's a college like ours or whether, the variety too. And America is really a wonderful place because people get second chances oftentimes. If they didn't do quite so well in high school as they wanted to do, they have second chances, once they get to college and university. So it's a wonderful time to go off to college, and including Harvard, we hope.
And just one more minute. So in terms of second chances, for the student who doesn't get into Harvard, what do you think is the best thing that they can do if they take a gap year before they go to another school?
Well, we love gap years, and we've been trying to get students to take gap years and to do something exciting and interesting before college. We've worked it into our admission letter starting in 1973. I started in 1972, so it's been a long time. I think the gap year is a chance to find out who you are, what beyond your intellect, what your heart is, what your soul is, what you really value. People who have taken a gap year prior to Harvard or other colleges, often parents say that my daughter was 18 when she took the gap year. She was 25 1 year later. They use college in a totally different way. So it can have a huge positive effect on students' lives.
Well, thank you. And on that note, thank you, Bill. If you would like additional information about Bill Fitzsimmons or Harvard University, please visit harvard.edu. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.